So we are going to talk about ACA exceptions. I dropped the word waiver out of here because it's really not about waivers. It's about exceptions to the rules and why it's important. And some of this is important right now, and some of it, if it waited a little while, it wouldn't matter so much. So I'm going to walk through what are those circumstances for you, and there'll be some handouts. The PowerPoint will be available through NIHB. They'll be posted, but it's not available as a handout today. Sorry about that. So let's start with the basics again, and Kitty went through some of this, but in the Affordable Care Act, there are three special provisions or rights provided to Indians. And so it's important, whether you're an Indian or not, for the purposes of getting the benefit of these or avoiding any consequences that might otherwise occur. And so the three special benefits are special enrollment. You're not limited to enrollment during an open enrollment period. Now, open enrollment ended on Monday. But if you're an Indian, we'll talk about who that is. If you're an Indian, you can enroll today, next week, 4 months from now. You can enroll, you can disenroll, you can re-enroll. You can enroll basically at any month. There's some timing issues that have to be dealt with, but basically you're not limited to enrolling only at that special window, as is true of most insurance plans. Wow. So, not only, sorry about that. That's okay. I have light here. What I was thinking is not only do you have nowhere to write except on your lap, now you have no light by which to write. I thought you're all going to be just scrawling in the dark. Or actually, I thought you'd really be napping, and I'd just be talking, droning on, you'd be sleeping. The other of the two specific protections that are important are the cost-sharing protections under the exchange plans. He talked about those as well, and they basically protect Indians from having any cost sharing if they're under 300% of poverty, and then like others, if they're below 400% of poverty, some additional protections that apply, but none if you're under 300% of poverty, and no cost sharing for services provided by an Indian health program, an ITU, or Indian Health Service, Tribal or Urban Indian Program. Having no cost sharing is a benefit to the individual if they're using an Indian Health Service program or were referred from an Indian health program to someone else. It won't matter because CHS might have paid for it or the health program would have paid and there would have been no fees. But it means that much additional income coming into that Indian health program or being protected from having to be paid through CHS, which creates more money to be used on other health services that either you or some member of your family or some member of your community will ultimately benefit from. So this is a really important benefit, and it parallels the benefits that we see in the Medicaid program where no cost sharing is permitted and payment, full payment to the Indian health program is required. And then the final protection for Indians is there's no tax penalty exception. Somewhere in this PowerPoint, I actually wrote out the whole phrase personal responsibility payment or something like that, which is the formal term for this obligation that if you don't have qualifying health coverage and you don't fit in an exempt class, then you would end up at the time of filing your taxes, you would have a personal responsibility payment, which most people think of as a tax penalty, and the Supreme Court referred to as a tax. However, Indians are exempt whether they have insurance or not, they're exempt from that tax penalty or that personal responsibility payment. So being Indian has some real benefits in this law in terms of special enrollment if you want to be in a plan, and cost-sharing protections if you have a plan, and exemption from tax penalties if you don't get any, if you have no health insurance. But who's an Indian under the ACA? This turned out to be much more troublesome than any of us thought when the law went through. The law passed and we all said, yay! And then folks read the law and then we said, oh, well, because of the way the law was written, which was in a very intense process in Congress. If you go back and look here at these three provisions of law, special enrollment, cost sharing, and tax penalty, each one of them was written in a different part of the law by a different set of staff. And each of that set of staff members and the congressional staff chose a different definition, citation, for the definition of Indian. And so one of them is the tax code. Another was the definition in the Indian Health Care Improvement Act, and a third one was from the Self-Determination Act. And they're virtually identical. But they all say, basically, unlike the ARA provision that Kitty referred to earlier that just said Indians and it didn't define the term, here they use these specific definitions, use three different ones to begin with. And at bottom, what it says is that the term an Indian is a person who's a member of an Indian tribe, which includes Alaska Natives. And the Indian tribe, the term means an Indian tribe, band, nation, pueblo, other organized group or community, including any Alaska Native village or group or regional or village corporation, and so on, as defined in the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. So, has a very specific definition. Despite a lot of work to try to a lot of work asking the administration to do regulations to define the term Indian broadly to correspond to what Medicaid had done, broadly to correspond to what IHS had done. In the end, the administration, an area of disagreement between tribal leaders and the administration, but nonetheless, the administration in its regulations said to be an Indian for the purposes, a member of an Indian tribe, for the purposes of the three protections of the Affordable Care Act, so those special enrollment, cost sharing, and tax penalty exemption, you have to be a member of a federally recognized tribe or an Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act corporation. Those are the folks who are Indian for the purposes of that law. Now, if you think about your own families, certainly in your communities, what you know is that there are a lot of people, a lot of Indian people who are understood in their community, accepted in their community as Indian, who may not be enrolled in the tribe because the tribe may have blood quantum requirements that prohibit them from qualifying. So they may be a tribe that says only if you are only if your mother is a full-blooded member of our tribe can you be a member of our tribe. Only if your father is. Only if you are 1/4 blood of our tribe or tribes. Only if, and so whatever the only if, there's some requirement. Others have a descendancy rule that basically says if you start out from this moment and you can prove descendancy till forever, you can be enrolled, but you still have to go through the steps of being enrolled. What that has led to is a lot of people in the United States who everyone in the community acknowledges to be Indian, but who are not actually enrolled in a tribe. That's especially true in California because of the special rules, the circumstances, nothing very special about the process by which they got there, but the experience of Indians who ended up being moved to California. In Alaska, it's a consequence of a failure to continue to support enrollment after the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act and the refocusing on the corporate structures. But and all over the United States, it's really a result of, in many circumstances, of people become separated from their tribes by having been moved from one community to another or having had to move for economic reasons to live in some other community, move to an urban area to work or something, and sort of losing a direct connection with the tribe. In some cases, it's simply intermarriage, which has resulted in the tribal in simply not qualifying under particular tribal rules. So the Health and Human Services and Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services and the Internal Revenue Service have all agreed on the same definition, and it's this one, that only members of federally recognized tribes and Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act corporations are Indian. This is so complicated because we say Indian here, and then we say Indian over there, and they're two different things. But I'm confident you guys can get this. I used to do child welfare work, and I spent a lot of time with kids who had, through cultural adoptions, cultural processes, gone from living with their biological parents to grandparents or auntie or someone else who became mom and dad. And they would talk about, this is mom and dad, that's mom and dad. They always knew exactly who they were talking about, and I was always skittering to catch up, to try to know if we were talking about mom, who was the nurturing, caring, the parent who was there every day, but who was actually biologically grandmother, or the other parent. I think most of us are able to sort of keep in mind these different concepts when they become near, and so in this case, we're all learning to accept there's Indian for the purposes of the Indian exemption, and there's Indian for other purposes under this law. For Medicaid purposes, all American Indians and Alaska Natives that are eligible for IHS services are Indian. So when Kitty said, basically CMS adopted a rule that picked up the IHS rules, which include descendancy, and people who are considered by their community to be Indian, to be members of the community, are all considered Indian. If for Medicaid purposes you're an Indian, that's a really important thing, because one of the vehicles, you apply for a marketplace plan, you're interested in marketplace plan, you apply for one, turns out you're eligible for Medicaid. You want to be sure they know you're Indian, and you can be Indian even in this broad definition for that purpose, and that's important because Medicaid also has special protections for Indians, including no cost sharing, that don't apply to other people. So all I can say is, keep in mind, for each purpose, know you're an Indian, regardless of whether it's through descendancy or membership in a federally recognized tribe or an ACA corporation, and make sure you fill out the right pieces. For the purposes of the Medicaid program, we can look at how CMS defines Indian, and I've put it here, but basically it's a member of a federally recognized tribe. It's anyone who resides in an urban center and meets one of the 4 criteria that's listed there for urban Indians, which is they're a member of a tribe or band that's been terminated since 1940, and those now recognized now or in the future by a state in which they reside, or who's a descendant in the first or second degree of any member, any Eskimo, Aleut, or other Alaska Native, anyone the Secretary of Interior considers to be Indian for any purpose, anyone considered to be Indian under regulations promulgated by the Secretary. In this case, that's the Secretary of Health and Human Services, which means the IHS. So if IHS thinks you're an Indian, Bureau of Indian Affairs thinks you're an Indian, you're an Alaska Native, Eskimo, or Aleut, you're an Indian for the purposes of being an urban Indian if you live in an urban center, or you're a member of a state-recognized tribe. You're also an Indian, without regard to the urban center piece, if you're considered by the Secretary of Interior to be an Indian for any purpose, so you don't have to live in an urban area, or by Health and Human Services Secretary to be an Indian for the purposes of eligibility for Indian Health Service, including California Indian, Eskimo, Aleut, or other Alaska Native. So this wraps up basically all the folks who we think of as Indian, engage with as Indians, their tribes relate to them principally as Indians, they get Indian Health Services, they get services from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, but they may not actually be enrolled. So it picks up all those folks, and for Medicaid purposes, those folks are covered. I included this slide in this presentation because it's a really clear explanation of what turns out to now we get way to the back, hardship exemptions will show up again. I'm really glad we're not doing this after lunch. Because if it were after lunch and you had eaten, you'd be asleep. Just bear with me. It does fall together, but it is really tedious. So what does it really mean to you and your family? Now, when I ask this question, I don't know what the answer will be here, but when I ask this question in Alaska, and to tribes I work with, or tribal organizations, and I'm, general meeting, lots of members of the tribe, there are 1,500 people, and I ask them, how many people in your family have married outside from another tribe? And some folks raise their hand. How many people married somebody who isn't Indian? So they have a spouse that's not Indian. How many people does that spouse bring a child with them who's not Indian? So you have stepchildren who aren't Indian. Or you've adopted a child who's not an Indian. Doesn't happen all that often, but it certainly happens. The person who served as deputy commissioner for me when I was commissioner of health in Alaska was adopted by a Native family. She was non-Native. She was non-Indian, but Indian for for lots of purposes. So what we looked at, when you start asking people about their families and how many people were actually enrolled in their tribe, from their extended family, what you start to see is lots more hands go up as folks started to think about who's in their family and how many variations there are in their own families. So if you plan to enroll in a qualified health plan, and listening to the discussion, the questions earlier, some of you are really working hard on encouraging enrollment. So if you're working with someone who's considering enrolling, then it's very important that they establish they're an Indian. Because if they're an Indian, they get special enrollment, they get cost-sharing protection, and they won't have tax penalties. Whenever it is they decide they want to apply, they will need to establish they're an Indian. That will create an Indian exemption. So if they ultimately decide not to enroll, they can be exempt. But by proving they're an Indian, they get all the benefits. So in the process of enrollment, you'll be asked to prove that you're an Indian. If you don't enroll, so even if you don't plan to enroll and you don't have any other qualifying insurance, sometime before April 2015, you should apply for an Indian exemption. Because if you don't, you'll have to pay the personal responsibility payment or the tax penalty. If you have income high enough to owe any taxes, you would have a tax penalty because everyone in the United States, every adult, every child, every person who isn't exempt, and they have to establish the exemption. It's not something where you get a free pass only if they don't catch you. You actually have to establish it. Otherwise, the tax penalty will be imposed. May not be a lot of money, but it may be some money. So everyone needs to get this tax exemption if they aren't going to be enrolling in a health plan. There are two different exemptions. And because we didn't want to make any of this easy, there's only one application, and the words are nearly impossible to keep straight. So the way they've been described generally is one is a member of an Indian tribe exemption. Tribe, for those of you in Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, Nevada, other places that you might be from outside of Alaska, this is not too hard a concept to think about tribe because we're only talking about the tribes. In Alaska, we're not only talking about the federally recognized tribes, some 229 of them, but we're also talking about 13 regional ANCSA corporations and innumerable village corporations that also, if you're a member or a shareholder in one of those, you qualify for this exemption. And I believe it is true that the pull-down menus, if you're applying, pull-down menus that have all those corporations, all the tribes and all the corporations are now all in place. Some states are still struggling with that for the state exchanges, but you don't have to worry about that out here because you guys didn't build your own exchange like we didn't in Alaska. We're all, Alaska looks like it's on the coast, looks like it ought to be blue, running right down the edge, but in fact looks just like the rest of the middle of the country. Not taking part in expansion, not taking part in building an exchange. It's all very sad. It's genuinely really sad. When you look at those numbers that Kitty handed out, and the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium did a huge study actually an economic study to evaluate the effect of Medicaid expansion, and it showed numbers very much like those and even larger. The economic impact is $1.5 billion being passed up, $400,000 a day being passed up that could be part of the Alaska economy, paying for health care, creating jobs in a tiny population state like Alaska, if only there were expansion. Apply that in Montana, go to the states with even bigger populations that are choosing not to do this, and you have to wonder about what the people who aren't choosing that option are thinking. It seems to me they're thinking about a completely political agenda, not about the well-being of the people who live in their state, Indian and non-Indian. Yeah, okay, so enough of my, mostly when you're doing training sponsored by IHS, you're not allowed to make these little political rants, but in this case, I can get by with it. There are two exemptions. One of them is they're both lifetime, sort of. One of them is a truly lifetime exemption. That's the one where you say, I am a member of a tribe. Once you establish that, or my child is, or whoever, once that is established for that individual, it lasts forever. The second, and that one comes, if you then go to enroll, it comes with all the benefits. The second one is a hardship exemption. So there are hardship exemptions for all kinds of things, none of which I can remember at the moment, but religious exemptions, homeless people have exemptions. There are a variety of exemptions for people so that they won't have to pay a tax penalty even if they don't get a health plan. But among those exemptions is an Indian hardship exemption. And this was intended to fill the gap that was created when inadvertently the definitions in the Affordable Care Act had to be narrowly defined to only include the members of tribes and not to cover all the people served by Indian Health Service and CMS as Indian, creating this weird gap in which some people who are eligible for Indian Health Service might have had to pay a penalty. They will not now because of the Indian hardship exemption that applies to other Indians and their family members. There are two different exemptions, only one application form. You can find it online, and you must look at the instructions, and you have received a handout. So I don't think this is connected to the internet, or I'd pull it up and show it to you, but this is the application. So the longer document that ends on the back page, it has little squares and things. It's dark out there, you probably can't see it, but that's the actual application. We are devoutly hopeful that it will get amended for 2015 because it is not as clear and easy as it could be for Indian exemptions. The instructions for it, there's a 20-page instruction booklet, and the citation is here for that application. Only 5 of the pages really matter all that much to you. The first 3 pages, which have the general instructions, and I made those are available to you. That's the wrong doc. Yeah. So that's this first thing with all the writing. And then, well, actually, that's this one. The instruction document has kind of the black top on it. And then there was another 2-page document. That's page 11 and 12. So pages 1 through 3 and pages 11 and 12 should have been stapled together, but I screwed up my emailing this morning. So I didn't get them all to NIHB to copy together. Those are the 5 pages of the instructions that apply to the Indian exemptions. The application goes through, it's a single application for a whole family, a tax filing unit. It's a single application whether you're applying for an Indian exemption as a member of an Indian tribe or a hardship exemption because you're not a member of an Indian tribe but you qualify for this Indian exemption. And it walks and you go through step by step to establish that you meet one of these criteria. And here's what they are. If you have the application and you wanted to write on it, you would turn to where question 7 is, which is on page 2 of the application. And it says, are you a member of an Indian tribe? Now, if you're reading the instructions and you're Alaska Native, so if Lincoln being back there was reading the instructions, and it said, is he a member of an Indian tribe? I know he's actually a member of his own tribe, but even if he weren't, if he was a shareholder in one of the regional or village corporations, he would answer yes. And then you stop the rest, you don't answer anything else on this page, you go on to step 3. You skip over, because if you answer the rest of the questions, they'll think you're applying for a hardship waiver. You're applying for the hardship exemption, not the Indian exemption, the member of an Indian tribe exemption. So just mark that. When you apply as an Indian to be considered a member of an Indian tribe, you will have to provide some documentation. And there are other people better at training about this. But basically, it's going to be a tribal enrollment card or a letter, a certificate of degree of Indian blood, if it includes enrollment, tribal enrollment information, proof of shareholder status in an ANCSA corporation, other documents from the tribe that demonstrate that you're a member of the tribe, any tribe. Doesn't have to be the tribe where you get services. You don't have to be living anywhere near an Indian health program. So if Laura moved from Albuquerque to DC, she could still have her Indian exemption. Even though there's no Indian program in DC, she'd still be entitled to her exemption as a member of an Indian tribe, regardless of where she lived in the United States. Doesn't matter. So you need to provide some proof of that, and the process for doing it's all laid out in these forms.